What if the band that reinvented rock also started the countdown to its collapse? It sounds wild, maybe even unfair, but stick with me, because when a single guitarist rewires how the instrument talks, the entire ecosystem takes notes. Then it takes shortcuts. A volcano of originality erupts, and the label machine bottles the lava, slaps on a logo, and sells it until the bottle's empty. That's the uncomfortable truth hovering over the story of Van Halen. Not because they weren't brilliant, they were, but because brilliance, when repeated by 1,000 hands with half the vision, can reshape a scene into something the inventor never intended. This isn't a hit piece. It's a forensic look at how one spark became a bonfire, then a burnout, and why the reset that followed felt less like betrayal and more like gravity. And once you see the chain reaction, it's hard to unsee it. Late 70s rock had a pulse you could count with your eyes closed. Blues moss on the frets, riffs that swaggered more than sprinted, solos that breathed and bled. Then a needle drops, and 90-something seconds split the air. Eruption lands like a meteor. Notes don't climb, they teleport. The fretboard stops being a map and becomes a runway for whatever your hands dare to try. Two-handed tapping wasn't brand new in the absolute sense, but Eddie made it feel like electricity deciding to speak English. He didn't just add technique, he changed the silhouette of what a guitar hero could be. It wasn't the old gunfighter with a dusty tone and a scowl. It was a grinning mad scientist who made the guitar argue with physics and come out smiling. Kids didn't just hear it, they felt permission. If the rules could bend that far, maybe there weren't rules. Only possibilities. That's how myths begin. That's also how waves of imitation start. Not from malice, but from awe. Everyone wants a piece of the future once someone proves it's already here. And once the doors open, crowds don't walk. They stampede. But that stampede comes with side effects. Eddie wasn't chasing a catalog tone. He was hacking together a solution to a problem only he could hear. He wanted the snarl of a humbucker without losing the snap of a Strat. A trem that could scream and still land on the note like a gymnast sticking a dismount. The Frankenstrat was a garage project that conquered arenas. Tape stripes, hot pickup, the trem system that let you make vowels with steel. It wasn't just a guitar, it was a manifesto in parts and solder. The industry did what industries do, turn a manifesto into a product line. Super Strats proliferated, thinner necks, hotter pickups, locking trems, high-gain rigs that shouted regardless of who held the pick. For a while, it felt like the moon landing. Everyone could buy a little piece of space-age power. Then, the uniform effect kicked in. When every new band shows up with the same sleek weapon, the silhouette blurs. Aesthetic unity became sonic uniformity. You didn't need a new idea, you needed the right guitar, tight pants, and a choreographed grin. Labels figured out they could replicate the vibe like fast food. The bun and the sauce were consistent, even when the meat, songs, got thinner. And when everything screams at once, the room eventually goes quiet. The 80s were a neon carousel, videos built like movie trailers, choruses polished until you could see your face in them, solos clocked with stopwatches, bigger venues, brighter lights, more hairspray than a small country could legally store. Audiences got spectacle on demand. Guitar became gymnastics, athletic, and glorious, but too often detached from the song it was supposed to elevate. You could swap cassettes and hear the same promise in different clothes. The night is eternal, the car is fast, the love is dangerous, the solo is faster than both. And to be fair, some of it was irresistible. Hooks that burrowed into your head and put rent down. But market logic has a habit of turning diamonds into rhinestones. The more a formula performs, the more the machine feeds it back to you. Radio programmers knew the safe tempo. MTV knew the safe image. Managers knew the safe story. Somewhere in there, the dangerous part of rock, surprise, got boxed up and stored behind the merch table. Audiences didn't quit because guitar got exciting. They drifted because excitement got predictable. When every fourth song detonates on the same beat with the same harmonic squeal, your ears learn the jump scare and stop flinching. And when listeners stop flinching, a different sound starts to feel like oxygen. The early 90s didn't arrive politely. They slouched in with ripped denim, scruffy hair, and songs that sounded like someone finally said the quiet part out loud. The guitars didn't beg to be admired. They dared you to listen. Choruses weren't engineered for stadium chants. They were confessions you could shout alone in your car at 2 a.m. Where the 80s perfected the pose, the 90s hunted for the feeling. Imperfection became a feature. A chord slightly out of tune wasn't a failure, it was a fingerprint. The message tilted from "watch me" to "hear this," and that tilt hit like a cold front. After a decade of chrome, the rust felt honest. Important point. This wasn't a hate note to Eddie's language of innovation. It was a refusal to keep living inside the photocopy. If a generation grows up on fire-breathing solos and confetti cannons, the next generation will naturally reach for the opposite. Low ceilings, heavy air, simple shapes that feel like real weight. Culture loves a swing. And when the pendulum is stuck on spectacle for too long, the pull toward confession becomes impossible to ignore. But do you blame the pioneer for the parade that formed behind him? Here's the center of the maze. Innovators break rules because they don't believe in them. Photocopiers print what sold yesterday because they're terrified of tomorrow. Eddie's playing was alive. Little wrong notes bent into right ones, harmonics blooming like fireflies, whammy bar syllables that turned steel into a voice. You can practice the moves and still miss the point. That's what the copycat economy often did. It sold the trick and forgot the story. Think of it like a recipe without a cook. Measurements perfect, flavor missing. The irony cut both ways. Fans who adored Eddie's imagination grew allergic to bands who reduced his creativity to finger speed and makeup. They weren't rejecting the master, they were bored with the replicas. Meanwhile, an entire generation learned to value songs over showmanship again. Not because technique is bad, technique is a tool. But because a tool without purpose is just noise. Eddie could make 6 strings sound like they were gossiping about you in the next room. Too many imitators made them sound like they were arguing over who got to go first. Listeners heard the difference, even if they couldn't explain it. That's why some giants survived the transition and some vanished overnight. You can't cancel sincerity. And yet, the legacy didn't sit quietly on a shelf. Time adds drama. After the apex years, the Van Halen narrative refused to fossilize. Lineup fractures turned into public puzzles. Plans for tributes surfaced, fizzled, then resurfaced with new names attached. One day, optimism. The next, a shrug. A son stepped into his own lane and got peppered with takes about the past he didn't ask to relive. Old bandmates volleyed comments that fans treated like court transcripts. Nothing about it erased the records. If anything, it made the music feel more human, because you could hear how much pressure genius creates in the lives orbiting it. There's a reason the headlines still spark debates. The myth is still alive. Some people want a clean hero story, others want the messy documentary. The truth is neither. The truth is a stack of great songs, a cultural earthquake, and a long tail of fallout that keeps feeding think pieces and late-night arguments. That persistence matters. It means the innovation wasn't just of its time. It's part of the conversation every time a new band tries to decide whether to dazzle or confess, whether to polish or bleed. Which brings us to the verdict everyone came for. They didn't ruin it, they broke it open. The problem isn't what pioneers build, it's what the marketplace does when it smells profit. Success attracts repetition. Repetition becomes wallpaper. Wallpaper breeds contempt. The 90s didn't erase the 80s. They demanded a palate cleanser after too many courses of the same dish. If anything, the intensity of the swing proves how potent the source spark was. Without Van Halen supercharging the instrument, technically and culturally, there's no reason for the backlash to be so total. You don't get a revolution against nothing. You revolt against a kingdom. And Van Halen, at their peak, were a kingdom. Riffs everyone wanted to steal. A stage presence every frontman studied. A guitarist whose smallest improvisation could turn a crowd into a single organism. When the tide went out, it stranded the copycats on the sand. The originals kept a boat. That's why their tracks refused to die. Ain't Talking About Love and Panama still hit like they were engineered yesterday. The rhythm section swings with mischief. The vocals swagger without apology. The guitar tone is a smile you can hear. That doesn't vanish because a trend changed codes. The harder question isn't blame, it's inheritance. What did the scene actually learn? Here's what endures. Speed is thrilling. Surprise is priceless. Gear can widen your palate, it can't paint for you. A solo that says something beats a solo that only says, look. A chorus that lands because you believe the voice behind it will outlast any choreographed wink. Eddie's genius wasn't the taps or the dives or the squeals. It was the way he turned mechanics into speech, jokes, sighs, sparks. The best bands that followed him didn't just borrow the toolbox, they stole the spirit of play. The worst stole the manual and forgot to bring ideas. Audiences always feel that difference. That's why trends swing, and why they'll keep swinging. After seasons of confessional fuzz, the pendulum can and will drift toward articulate flash again. Just not the cut and paste version. The sweet spot is timeless. Write something true, then perform it like the strings might catch fire. That's Van Halen at their best. That's what their imitators missed when they turned art into a checklist. So did Van Halen ruin rock? They exposed its weak spot. When a scene falls in love with invention, the trick becomes a door. Eddie held the door. 1,000 bands rushed through, 100 factories installed turnstiles, and eventually listeners wandered off looking for a window that still opened. That cycle isn't a crime, it's culture. Innovate, imitate, saturate, reset, then do it again. Van Halen just happened to run that loop at stadium volume with fireworks overhead. And once you've felt sparks like that, you don't settle for sparks that smell like a knockoff. You wait for the next real surprise. If you've ever chased a sound until it went dull, you know the feeling. The solution isn't play faster, it's say more. Make the guitar talk in a way nobody saw coming. Then write a chorus that gives it something worth saying. That's the legacy that survives fads and haircuts. That's why their records still thump in car stereos on long drives and still make teenagers stare at their fingers thinking, what else can this thing do? The answer, then and now, is simple. More than yesterday if you mean it. And that's the twist nobody wants to admit. The reset that pushed the 80s out of the spotlight wasn't a rejection of excellence. It was a demand for meaning. Van Halen didn't kill rock. They dared it to evolve. The copycats stalled it. The next wave jump-started it. Tomorrow's wave will do it again. If you love this stuff, you're not choosing eras, you're chasing the spark wherever it jumps. Eddie found a way to make 6 strings feel like a living thing. The rest of us are still catching up. If this story lit a spark, hit subscribe and keep it burning. I drop deep dives like this every week. No filler, just big ideas, hidden twists, and the moments that changed music. Tap the bell so you don't miss what's next, because the next chapter might flip your whole playlist.